The first warning came as a flicker on the radar, a tiny anomaly that barely registered among the regular pulses of the Earth's atmosphere. By the time the global defense networks had noticed the anomaly, it was already too late. A fleet of alien ships, massive, black, and sleek, dropped from the sky like shadows made solid. Their arrival was swift and brutal, coordinated with an efficiency that hinted at centuries of battle-hardened experience. In mere minutes, entire cities across the globe were engulfed in firestorms. Nuclear-grade weapons, the likes of which Earth had never seen, tore through the skies, leveling structures that once stood as symbols of humanity's progress. The Vorath had arrived, and Earth had no defense. Colonel Evelyn Carter, stationed at a high-security bunker in what had once been Northern California, was among the first to see the devastation. As her command center went dark with the loss of power, the screens flickered back to life, showing the towering infernos across the eastern seaboard. She stared at the footage, a mixture of disbelief and rising fury in her chest. "We've lost contact with DC," a voice crackled over her comms. "Sir, it's happening everywhere." They're everywhere." Carter clenched her jaw. The United Nations had never prepared for something like this, despite every warning they'd ever received about the possibility of alien contact. The training, the drills, none of it mattered now. The fight had already begun, and it was far worse than they had imagined. She turned to face the room of officers who looked to her for guidance. "Get me the Strategic Defense Code," Carter snapped, her voice sharp with authority. The military was already scattered and reeling, but she knew that if humanity had any chance of surviving this invasion, it would come from quick action. "We can't afford to wait. We strike back now, or we're done." In the chaos, there was no time to prepare. The global defenses, satellites, missile systems, and air forces were already overwhelmed. Nothing on Earth's side could match the speed or the sheer scale of the Vorath's attack. Earth's response was almost laughable. Early attempts to counterstrike were met with immediate failure as the alien ship's shields absorbed every missile, every blast, like they were nothing more than raindrops. Earth's weapons were outdated, primitive compared to the technology the Vorath wielded. Yet the Vorath's arrogance proved to be their fatal flaw. In the first few days, Colonel Carter made a dangerous call. She took a small, elite team of soldiers and covert operators to launch a counteroffensive. If the resistance could hit the invaders before they established their foothold, perhaps they could still salvage something from this catastrophe. "Listen up," Carter addressed the small group of soldiers gathered in front of her. "We're going to take one of their ships down. It's a suicide mission, but it's our best shot at showing them we won't roll over." The soldiers nodded, grim determination setting in their eyes. No one had asked for this war, but they would fight it to the end. With a crackle of energy, the transport ship lifted off, making its way toward the nearest Vorath warship, floating menacingly in orbit. Below them, Earth burned. Above them, the stars glowed dimly, indifferent to the carnage. But for Colonel Carter and her team, the fight had just begun. As they closed in on the alien flagship, the team's nerves were taut. A single wrong move, and they would be incinerated before they even had a chance to strike. Yet, as they neared the ship, something changed in Carter. In that moment, staring at the massive, looming ship, she knew the truth. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for its soul. The strike on the Vorath warship was a gamble. Carter's team had infiltrated the alien vessel using stealth tactics and advanced technology scavenged from the ruins of Earth's cities. They planted charges on the ship's core systems, hoping to cripple its defenses long enough for Earth's remaining forces to mount some form of counteroffensive. But as the charges detonated, they quickly realized the sheer scope of the enemy they were dealing with. The alien warship was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Its insides were a labyrinth of shifting metal and energy conduits, and the Vorath soldiers aboard were calculating, brutal, and ruthless. Carter's team fought their way to the core, But as they planted their final explosives, the ship's energy shields flickered back to life, and an overwhelming wave of Vorath troops swarmed toward them. "Retreat!" Carter shouted over the comms, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Get to the extraction point. Now." But the Vorath were too fast. Their superior technology had turned the tide of the battle, and what had started as a covert mission to sabotage the ship quickly devolved into a desperate flight for survival. The team scattered, but not everyone made it out alive. Several soldiers were cut down in the firefight, their screams echoing in Carter's ear as she fought to keep moving. When they finally reached the extraction point, the transport ship was waiting, hovering just above the ruined landing zone. As the team boarded, the mission's failure weighed heavily on Carter's mind. They had destroyed the ship's engines and disrupted its control systems, but it wasn't enough to stop the full force of the Vorath fleet from descending on Earth. "Report," Carter barked, her breath ragged from the intense firefight. "Casualties. Severe," came the reply from Sergeant Hunter, the team's medic, as he tended to the wounded. "But we've got the intel we need. The Vorath flagship is vulnerable. They won't be able to launch full-scale assaults for at least 24 hours. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It bought humanity precious time to regroup. But Carter knew they had to act fast. In the wake of the failed mission, Earth's resistance forces scrambled to form some semblance of order from the chaos. Civilians, scientists, soldiers, anyone who could contribute to the fight against the Vorath was recruited into the makeshift army. Yet there was a glaring weakness. Earth had no unified command. No one had experience fighting a war like this. Dr. Marcus Ree, a brilliant engineer and former military strategist, became one of the few people the Resistance could rely on. Ree had been a part of a covert project that had secretly researched alien technologies for decades, but until now, it had all been theoretical. With the Vorath now on Earth's doorstep, those theories became crucial. "Colonel Carter," Ree said over a secure channel, "I've got something. It's risky, but it could give us an edge." Carter leaned forward, eyes narrowing in focus. "What do you have?" "I found a way to reverse engineer some of the Vorath tech. They use an energy shield system that we may be able to disrupt. I need a team to retrieve an energy core from a Vorath battle zone to make it work." Carter hesitated. The battle zones were littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, both human and Vorath, and the stakes had never been higher. But the alternative, waiting for the Vorath to complete their domination of Earth, was unacceptable. "Prepare the team," she ordered. "We're going in." The decision was made. Carter knew this wasn't just another mission. It was humanity's last chance to turn the tide. With Ree's expertise, the team could unlock the potential to turn the Vorath's own weapons against them. And if it failed, well, then there would be no Earth left to save. The Resistance, bruised and battered, had been pushed to the brink. But the fire in their hearts hadn't gone out yet. It had only grown stronger. They were no longer simply fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future. The mission to retrieve the Vorath energy core had been a disaster from the start. Carter's team had infiltrated the alien-controlled city in Eastern Europe under the cover of darkness, slipping past the automated sentries and armed drones that patrolled the area. But nothing could have prepared them for the sheer scale of the Vorath's ground forces. The city, once bustling with life, now lay in ruins, its streets littered with the charred remains of buildings and vehicles. The silence was oppressive, too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. As they advanced toward the central energy facility, the first sign of trouble came from the ground beneath them. A low rumble echoed through the streets, followed by a rapid series of sonic blasts that shattered the stillness. Carter's eyes snapped open in recognition. "Ambush!" she shouted, just as an explosion rocked the building they were taking cover behind. The Vorath had anticipated their every move. In an instant, the city erupted into chaos. The resistance soldiers, outgunned and outnumbered, found themselves caught in a trap. The Vorath had laid out a network of energy-based traps that disabled their communications and targeting systems, leaving them vulnerable to the alien onslaught. What had begun as a covert strike now became a deadly firefight for survival. Carter's heart pounded in her chest as she fought to maintain control of her team. "Hold the line," she barked as enemy soldiers advanced, their sleek, armored bodies gliding over the debris-strewn streets with terrifying speed. Despite the odds, Carter's soldiers fought back with everything they had, determined not to let this mission be the end of them. "Sergeant, get the core," Carter ordered, locking eyes with Sergeant Hunter, who nodded grimly. "I'm on it, Colonel," Hunter replied, leading a small team toward the facility's entrance. But as the core was extracted, Carter's worst fear came true. The facility wasn't just a power plant, it was a fortified stronghold. The Vorath had rigged the entire area with explosives, and the moment the energy core was removed, the countdown began. A loud, mechanical whirring filled the air, signaling that the self-destruct sequence had been activated. "We've got less than 5 minutes." Dr. Ree's voice came through the comms, his panic barely concealed. "Get out, now." Carter's team fought their way through the streets, but every path they tried was blocked by more Vorath forces. The resistance was pinned down. It was only a matter of time before they would be surrounded. "Fall back," Carter shouted, though she knew there was no place left to retreat to. "Go, go, go!" As they neared the extraction point, the worst happened. The Vorath's elite soldiers appeared, cutting off their escape route. Carter's pulse raced as she ordered her team to take up defensive positions. In the midst of the chaos, a single Vorath soldier, a towering figure in black armor, stepped forward, his glowing red eyes locked on Carter. Without a word, the figure raised a plasma rifle and fired, the shot hitting one of her soldiers square in the chest. The blast sent him flying back, his body slamming into a pile of debris. "No!" Carter screamed, her blood boiling. She drew her sidearm and fired back, the weapon's recoil reverberating through her arm as she took aim at the Vorath soldier. But the alien was too quick, ducking and weaving with unnatural agility. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between them, his sword drawn and raised for a fatal strike. But Carter was faster. With a swift motion, she threw herself at the soldier, tackling him to the ground. Her knife slid from its sheath, and with a powerful thrust, she plunged it into the alien's neck, severing the head in one brutal motion. The alien's body twitched once and then went still. Blood, thick, black, and ichor-like, spilled out across the ground, staining the earth beneath them. Carter stood over the fallen soldier, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The battle was far from over, but she had just claimed a victory that would cost her more than she could have ever imagined. As the countdown on her wrist comm beeped one final warning, she turned to her team. "Let's move," she said, voice hoarse but determined. "We're getting out of here." With the energy core secured, they sprinted toward the waiting transport ship. The world around them was falling apart, but for a fleeting moment, Carter allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity had a shot at surviving this war. But as they reached the extraction point, a massive explosion rocked the city. The facility had detonated, sending a shockwave that knocked Carter and the others off their feet. As the dust settled, the weight of the cost of victory hit her like a freight train. The explosion had taken out half of the remaining team. The mission had been successful. The energy core was in their hands. But at what cost? The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of ash and burning rubble as Colonel Carter stood in the ruins of the Resistance's makeshift command center. The energy core they'd fought so hard to secure had made its way to Dr. Ree's lab, where the scientist and his team worked frantically to reverse engineer the technology. Despite the success of their mission, the victory felt hollow. The death toll from the failed operation was staggering. Carter had watched soldiers she'd fought beside for years fall in battle, their lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. It was a grim reminder that each small victory against the Vorath came at a terrible price. The atmosphere inside the base was tense. People spoke in hushed voices, the weight of grief and anger hanging in the air. Carter was deep in thought, her mind trying to make sense of everything when her comms crackled to life. "Colonel, you need to see this." Sergeant Hunter's voice was strained, almost frantic. Carter's heart sank as she rushed toward the secure room where Hunter had gathered a few of the remaining officers. Inside, the air was thick with static from an encrypted video feed. On the screen was an image of the facility, the energy core chamber, the very place where the core had been extracted. "I don't understand," Carter muttered, staring at the footage. It was a recorded security feed, and at first, everything seemed routine. But as the camera panned, Carter's blood ran cold. There, in the shadows, was a familiar face, one she had seen countless times before. "Lieutenant Daniels," Carter whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. Daniels was one of her most trusted officers. He'd been with her since the early days of the Resistance, a reliable and skilled soldier. But there he was, clearly seen conversing with a group of Vorath soldiers in the footage. His movements were calm, deliberate, far too calculated for someone who had sworn an oath to protect humanity. "Impossible," Carter muttered, shaking her head. "It can't be." But the video didn't lie. Daniels was handing over critical information to the Vorath, his face betraying no remorse. He had been working with the enemy all along. Hunter turned to her, his expression grim. "We've cross-referenced the footage. There's no doubt. Daniels has been compromised. He's been leaking information about our movements and operations to the Vorath since the early days of the war." A cold fury stirred in Carter's chest. I trusted him. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in her gut. Daniels wasn't just a soldier. He was someone she confided in, someone she believed had the same sense of duty. To know that he had been feeding the Vorath all this time made her question everything. How deep did this betrayal go? "We need to act fast," Hunter said, his voice low and urgent. "If he's been in contact with the Vorath this long, he'll know where we are. The next strike could come at any moment." Carter's mind raced. They had to neutralize the threat before it was too late. But even more troubling was the thought that there could be more traitors within their ranks. Daniels was just the tip of the iceberg. If the Vorath had infiltrated their command structure this deeply, then the entire resistance was compromised. As Carter tried to form a plan, the door to the room burst open and Lieutenant Mara, one of Carter's most loyal officers, entered in a hurry. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with panic. "Colonel," Mara gasped, breathless. "We've just intercepted a transmission. Daniels isn't working alone. There's a mole in the highest ranks of the Resistance. The Vorath know everything about our next move." Carter's stomach twisted. The timing was no coincidence. Daniels had clearly been in contact with someone within their inner circle, and now their every move was at risk of being sabotaged. The Resistance was in danger of crumbling from within. "Damn it," Carter muttered, pacing back and forth. "Who else knows about this?" "We don't know yet," Mara replied, her voice tight. "But it's clear the traitors are among us. We can't afford to wait. We have to find Daniels before the Vorath act on the intel." Carter nodded, her mind already processing the next steps. "I'll deal with Daniels. You and Hunter start a sweep of the base. Everyone's a suspect now. Trust no one." Her words were sharp, deliberate. The Resistance was on the verge of collapse, but Carter wasn't about to let it fall without a fight. She would hunt down the traitors, no matter where they hid. The survival of humanity depended on it. As she turned to leave, Mara hesitated. "Colonel, you can't do this alone. We'll help you." Carter stopped and looked back at them, a steely resolve in her eyes. "No, I have to do this myself. Daniels knows me. He won't trust anyone else. This ends now." With that, she stepped out of the room, her mind focused on the task ahead. The Resistance's most trusted officer had betrayed them, and the price of that betrayal would be paid in blood. Colonel Carter's boots echoed against the cold, concrete floor as she made her way through the darkened hallways of the Resistance's underground base. Every step was deliberate, every muscle tensed in preparation. The betrayal that had rocked her to her core was now fueling her every thought. Daniels was out there, somewhere, and Carter wasn't going to let him get away. She paused at the door to the communications room, her hand hovering over the handle. The last thing she needed was to alert anyone that she was onto him. Daniels had always been cautious, but the cracks in his facade were becoming clearer. She had trusted him, and now it was time to repay that trust with a cold, calculated justice. Inside the room, the walls were lined with encrypted communication terminals and monitoring screens. The operators sat hunched over their stations, their faces illuminated by the glow of data. Carter's eyes quickly scanned the room, noting the positions of everyone present. As she stepped forward, her voice was quiet but commanding. "Lock the doors," she ordered, her tone low enough to avoid alerting the rest of the base. The operators nodded, immediately securing the room behind her. With her back to the wall, Carter pulled out a small datapad. She quickly accessed the facility's surveillance network, tracking Daniels' movements. It wasn't difficult, his pattern was predictable. He always took the same routes, always used the same encrypted channels to send his messages. Carter's eyes narrowed as she saw his last known location, a hidden armory deep within the complex, one only a handful of high-ranking officers knew about. "He's there," she muttered to herself. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears as she prepared to confront him. Before she left, Carter turned to one of the operators, a young officer she had grown to trust over the course of the war. "I need you to monitor everything, keep an eye on any movements within the facility. If anyone comes looking for me, I'll need backup." The officer nodded, his face tense but resolute. "Understood, ma'am. We've got your back." Carter didn't need to hear more. She turned and moved swiftly toward the armory, her every sense heightened as she neared the place where Daniels had betrayed them all. The armory was silent when Carter arrived. She crouched by the entrance, listening for any sign of movement. Her hand was steady as she reached for her weapon, a sleek, modified rifle designed for close-quarters combat. She knew the moment she entered that room, there would be no turning back. Inside, the air smelled of metal and oil. The shelves were stocked with weapons and explosives, but Carter's eyes were fixed on the figure standing in the center of the room. Daniels, his back to her, was in the process of securing a small bag filled with intelligence data. He hadn't noticed her yet. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Don't move, Daniels." Daniels froze, his body tense as if caught in a moment of hesitation. He slowly turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing, the weight of the moment hanging between them. "You don't have to do this, Colonel," Daniel said quietly, his voice calm, almost eerily so. "You don't understand. The Vorath, they offered us survival. We were losing the war. They have technology that can end all this. I was just ensuring the future of humanity." Carter's grip tightened on her rifle. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "No, Daniels, you were ensuring the future of humanity. You were ensuring your own survival. You sold us out, and you sold out every person who died in this war." Daniels' eyes flickered briefly, a flash of something like guilt passing over his features before it was gone. "You don't get it. The Vorath are stronger than us. Their technology, their forces, we never stood a chance. But they promised to spare the few of us who cooperated. You can't save everyone, Colonel." A bitter laugh escaped Carter's lips. "Maybe not, but I'll die trying. And I'll make sure you never get the chance to betray anyone again." Without warning, Daniels reached for a hidden sidearm, drawing it with a speed that would have caught most by surprise. But Carter was faster. Her rifle was already raised, and in the space of a heartbeat, she fired. The shot rang out, striking Daniel square in the chest. The force of the impact threw him back, his body slamming into the metal shelves. Carter didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. Daniels was dead, and it was a grim necessity. The war wasn't over, but this was one less enemy to face. As she stood over him, her eyes hardened. She had lost friends, comrades, and now a traitor. But she would never stop fighting. Not for Earth, not for humanity, not for the future. With Daniels' betrayal exposed, the Resistance would need to regroup, rebuild, and prepare for the Vorath's next assault. The war was far from over, and Carter knew it. But now she was more determined than ever to see it through to the bitter end. The tension in the air was palpable as Colonel Carter stood at the command center, watching the holographic displays flicker to life in front of her. The Resistance, though severely weakened, had begun to regroup after the betrayal of Daniels. Word of his treason had spread quickly, and the remaining soldiers were divided. Some were eager for revenge, while others were disillusioned, questioning their leader's ability to keep them safe. Carter knew she had to restore their faith in the fight, or the Resistance would fracture irreparably. "Status report," Carter demanded, her voice sharp. Lieutenant Mara, standing beside her, input commands into a terminal. "We've identified several weak points in the Vorath defense grid using the intel from the Energy Core. Dr. Ree believes it's possible to disable their main communication relay. If we do that, we can cripple their ability to coordinate their forces, at least temporarily." Carter studied the map of the Vorath-held territories projected before her. The plan was ambitious, a high-risk, high-reward mission that could give Earth's forces a chance at victory. The idea of taking out the communication relay felt like a spark in the darkness, a possible turning point in this long, brutal war. "Is the team ready?" she asked, her gaze meeting Mara's. "We've gathered a mixed group of engineers, soldiers, and intel officers," Mara replied, though her voice was tinged with concern. "But morale is low. Everyone's tired, and many are still reeling from the losses we've taken. There's talk of surrender. Some are questioning if the fight is worth it anymore." Carter's jaw clenched. She had expected this. After Daniels' betrayal, the Resistance had lost its sense of unity. But now, more than ever, they needed to rally together. Earth's survival depended on it. "We're all questioning it," Carter said, her voice low but resolute. "We're questioning our survival, our purpose. But I'm telling you, Mara, this isn't over, not as long as there's breath in our lungs. If we fail now, we won't just lose this war. We'll lose everything we've ever stood for." Mara nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "Understood, Colonel." The weight of Carter's words hung heavily in the air, but they were also a spark that reignited something in her. She turned back to the map, focusing on the next steps. The mission ahead was clear: strike the Vorath relay, cripple their communications, and buy Earth's forces time to regroup and retaliate. But even as she prepared for the operation, she knew that failure wasn't just possible, it was likely. As the team assembled, Carter found herself surrounded by faces, some familiar, some new, that all shared the same weariness, the same hunger for a final push. No one was under any illusion about what this mission meant. It was either victory or death. Carter stood before them, taking in the determined faces of her soldiers. Despite their exhaustion, despite the overwhelming odds, they stood ready to fight. She had seen this spirit before. It was the same spirit that had gotten them this far. The same spirit that had made Earth's resistance a force to be reckoned with, even in the face of annihilation. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," she said, her voice firm and strong. "We're fighting for our future, for our children, for every human being who's still out there, hoping against hope that this madness will end. We can't let the Vorath take that from us." Her words seemed to resonate with the group. Slowly, they nodded, a collective resolve beginning to build in the room. The mission was set. The plan was in motion. They would attack the Vorath relay at dawn, taking advantage of a small window of opportunity when the aliens would be transitioning their forces to another battlefront. The night before the mission, Carter stood alone on the observation deck, staring out over the shattered landscape of Earth. The war had destroyed so much, and yet, as she looked at the stars above, she couldn't help but feel that there was still hope. The Vorath were brutal, merciless, but they weren't invincible. They hadn't counted on humanity's resilience, on the sheer will to survive that coursed through every person on this planet. No matter how many lives had been lost, no matter how many betrayals had cut deep into their hearts, Carter knew one thing for certain: humanity's fight was far from over, and she would see it through to the very end. The first light of dawn crept across the battlefield, casting long shadows over the ruined landscape. Colonel Carter stood at the front of the assembled team, her face grim but resolute as she surveyed the terrain. They had reached the edge of the Vorath's communication relay station, a towering, heavily fortified structure nestled in the middle of a sprawling desert. It was one of their most critical facilities, and taking it down would cripple their ability to coordinate their forces, buying Earth's resistance time to reorganize and strike back. The team had split into two groups, one to infiltrate the facility, the other to set up a diversion on the far side of the base. Carter was leading the infiltration team, her eyes scanning every movement, every piece of cover as they moved into position. "We hit them fast and hard," Carter said, her voice a low growl. "We don't give them a chance to respond. The second we disable their communications, we pull back. No heroics. Our mission is simple. We get in, we get out, and we make sure they can't call for reinforcements." Her words were met with silent nods, each soldier fully aware of the stakes. This mission was their last hope. They couldn't afford to fail. The team moved forward, their boots making little sound on the cracked earth beneath them. Carter's pulse quickened with each step. Despite the resolve in her chest, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. If they failed, the resistance would be finished. If they succeeded, it would only be a matter of time before the Vorath retaliated in full force. There would be no guarantees of survival, just one last chance to shift the balance of the war. As they neared the facility, Carter raised her hand, signaling for the group to halt. She motioned to the others, her gaze scanning the perimeter for security patrols. The Vorath were notorious for their surveillance systems, and Carter knew they couldn't afford to be seen. "I'll take the guard on the left," Sergeant Hunter whispered, his voice steady. "I'll cover the right," Mara added, her hand already on her weapon. Carter nodded. "Make it quick and quiet. No alarms. We move in 5. The two soldiers slid into the shadows, disappearing from view. Carter's heart raced as she crouched, waiting for the first strike. There was no turning back now. Every moment felt like an eternity as she watched Hunter take down the first guard with swift precision, Mara following suit seconds later. The way they worked together was a testament to their training, their unity forged in the fires of battle. "Clear," Hunter whispered into the comms, his voice barely audible. "Move in," Carter ordered. The team advanced, slipping through the base's outer perimeter and approaching the massive communication relay tower. It was a behemoth of metal and alien technology, its surface gleaming under the rising sun. At its base, a security terminal hummed quietly, oblivious to the infiltration taking place mere meters away. Carter reached for the device on her belt, a small, compact, explosive charge designed to disable the relay without causing a full detonation. If they did this right, the Vorath would lose control of their entire communication network, leaving them blind to Earth's movements. "Ready," Carter said, her voice calm, even as the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on her chest. With a swift motion, she attached the charge to the terminal, securing it in place. She nodded to Hunter, signaling him to cover the perimeter. They all knew that the second the charge went off, the clock would start ticking. The diversion team would have to hold the line long enough for them to escape. 5 seconds, Carter said. There was no turning back. As the countdown ticked in her ear, the ground beneath her seemed to vibrate with attention. 4 seconds. 3, 2. The explosion was sharp and deafening, the sound ripping through the air as the communication terminal shorted out. For a moment, everything was still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, alarms blared throughout the facility. The Vorath had been alerted. Carter's pulse surged as she motioned for the team to retreat. "Fall back, now," she shouted. The team moved with practiced speed, weaving between obstacles and ducking behind cover as they made their way toward the extraction point. The sounds of gunfire erupted behind them, the Vorath realizing that their communications were down and scrambling to regroup. But the resistance team was already too far ahead, cutting through the base's defenses with precision. The diversion team was making their presence felt, drawing the attention of the majority of the enemy forces, leaving Carter's team the window they needed. As they neared the extraction point, Carter could feel her chest tighten with the pressure of the mission's success. They had done it. They had crippled the Vorath's ability to communicate, and now they had the time they so desperately needed to plan the next phase of the resistance. But there was no time to celebrate. The Vorath would not sit idly by. The war was far from over. Carter turned to her team, her voice steely and determined. "Get to the ship. We have one shot at this. We're not done yet." The air was thick with the hum of the engines as the resistance team boarded their transport ship, the metallic ramp clanging shut behind them. Carter's breath came in heavy gasps, her chest still tight from the adrenaline of the mission. They had done it, successfully disabled the Vorath's communication relay, buying Earth's forces the precious time they so desperately needed. But the victory felt fleeting. They had made their move, but the Vorath were not a foe to be underestimated. They would retaliate with everything they had. The ship lifted off the ground, and Carter watched through the viewport as the communication relay station slowly shrank into the distance, a fading symbol of their victory. But she couldn't afford to linger on the thought. There was no time for rest, no time for reflection. The next phase of the war had already begun. "We've got about 2 hours before the Vorath realize what's happened," Mara said, breaking the silence as she approached Carter. "We need to get back to base and regroup. We won't have much time before they come at us with everything." Carter nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. They couldn't afford to waste the advantage they'd earned. Earth's resistance had proven it could strike a blow, but now they had to build on that momentum. The Vorath had underestimated humanity once before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. "Make sure the team gets some rest," Carter said, her voice firm. "We're going to need every single one of them for what's coming. We've poked the hornet's nest, but the real fight starts now." As the transport ship soared through the atmosphere, Carter glanced over her shoulder at the rest of the crew. They were battle-worn, weary, but their eyes burned with the same determination she saw in herself. The war was far from over. This was just the beginning of the end. Back at their hidden base, the team quickly debriefed with Dr. Ree and the senior commanders. The gravity of their success in disabling the Vorath's communication systems was not lost on them. It was a game-changer, a crippling blow to the alien invaders, who now found themselves isolated and vulnerable. But this small victory was tempered by the growing realization that the war was far from decided. "Carter, we've intercepted a transmission," Dr. Ree said, his voice grave. "The Vorath have activated their contingency protocols. They're deploying their most elite units to track us down. This won't just be a retaliation. They're coming to finish the job." Carter clenched her fists, her jaw tight. Then let them come. She knew that this was the moment they had to make their stand. The Vorath had made Earth their battleground, and now they were coming for the last remnants of humanity's resistance. But Carter wasn't about to surrender. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Carter continued, her mind already racing with plans. We know where their strike force is mobilizing. We hit them before they can organize. There was a fire in the eyes of the Resistance's commanders as they gathered around the planning table. The stakes had never been higher. It wasn't just their survival on the line anymore. This was humanity's last stand. The hours that followed were a blur of strategy meetings, equipment checks, and final preparations. Carter's team was ready. The diversionary tactics they had used to disable the relay would be replicated in the coming assault, but this time they would be the ones on the offensive. They would cripple the Vorath's most dangerous units before they could regroup. The battle would be fierce. Carter knew that. But as she stood before her team, a renewed sense of purpose filled her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about reclaiming their home. This was about showing the Vorath, and every species across the galaxy, that humanity would never be crushed. They had fought to the edge of extinction. Now they would fight to the end. As the Resistance team readied for their final assault, Carter stood at the forefront, her eyes scanning the horizon. The war was entering its most dangerous phase, but she was more determined than ever. Humanity had survived the impossible before, and they would do it again. The Vorath had underestimated them once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The battle for Earth would be their last, but it would also be the beginning of the end for the Vorath.